Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we are doing the final review from my second Tavour shipment. So this is another review of beers I have gotten from the Tavour service. And I saved a couple for last that I thought were going to be particularly enjoyable for me and certainly I hope for you. We are reviewing Barleywines today. If you're not sure what a barley wine is, it is not wine, it is a beer. It has the name based on historical context. The alcohol content really averages somewhere in the range of 8 to really on the high end, 15, 16 it could go, which tends to be quite higher with an ABV that is similar to that of wine. And indeed, this is a very, very old style. It's one of the original beers, frankly, that was brewed with a lot of grain. And it was, you know, essentially a wine to the ancient peoples, only made from barley as the grain versus from fermented grapes, thus barley wine. So it is not a wine, it is a beer. It just has a very high ABV. Yes, there are other beer styles that also have high ABVs, imperial stouts, you know, double, triple IPAs, etc., but those are very specific and distinctly different styles. That's why they're not lumped into the barley wine category. Barley wines typically are among the most complex flavor-wise beers that there are, much like a wine would be, just layer upon layer upon layer of flavor to go along with that high ABV, and they have very strong, bold, pronounced flavors. This is a style for the big beer lover. If you've never had a barley wine, I really think you ought to consider seeking one out. They do tend to cost more. There's a lot more involved in creating a barley wine. It takes a lot more ingredients, typically a lot more time, but they're certainly worth trying several just to see what you think about them. It's another one of my personal favorite styles. I happen to love them. I don't drink them often, but every time I do, I'm always glad I did. So, short little history lesson out of the way. Today's review, we are starting first with the Adroit Theory's Tenebris. This is a 9% barley wine. They are based out of Purcellville, Virginia. This will be my second Adroit Theory beer that I have tried. I enjoyed their last one. It was a hazy IPA. Looking forward to trying their barley wine. Just with the last one, Adroit Theory likes to do this on the back of the label, and I really appreciate this. I think this is a great idea. They give you ideas for various pairings. For food, they suggest adobo braised pork belly with creamed baby bok choy congee. For cheese, they suggest Cowgirl Creamery's Red Hawk, and for a cigar, La Gloria Cubana Series N. And they say to serve a little bit cooler than British cellar temperature. They say 50 to 54 degrees. I'm still going to be targeting British cellar temperature just because I like to keep temperature consistent across all of my beer reviews. And I've done that, save one the other day when I had to work and I was rushed. I just had to get to it when it was still a little cooler than that. Second beer today, Smog City Brewing's Bourbon Barrel-Aged O.E. This is 14.1% ABV on their barley wine. They are based out of Torrance, California. You'll notice there's a 5.1% ABV difference across these two barley wines, and that falls right in range with the style. It really 8, 9 on the low end, and 14, 15, 16 on the high end. I've seen some approaching 20, but they're all going to be higher ABV. Big, bold, very flavor-forward beers. They are beers meant to be sipped and enjoyed slowly, much as one would do a wine. So without further ado, I can't wait. We're going to jump right in with Adroit Theory's Tenebris, clocking in at 9% ABV. All right, jumping straight in with our first beer of the day. This is Adroit Theory's Tenebris, 9% ABV barley wine out of Purcellville, Virginia. Before I get this poured in the glass, I want to recap. I've mentioned this multiple times, but just to make sure it really sinks in. You've heard me make reference to British cellar temperature in many review videos. Specifically, what that is for us that don't use metric, it's 55 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly. The reason that that is the target is that it is an ideal temperature where the beer is still cold, but it's not so cold that it dulls the aroma and it dulls the flavor. Cold is the enemy of flavor and aroma in beer. It needs to be warmer than coming out of your refrigerator, which is probably in the upper 30s, lower 40s. That's too cold. It dulls the flavor and the aroma and doesn't let it open up. You want to taste your beer. It's the same reason you don't pour craft beer into a chilled glass. Save that for big box domestic crap. This is not crap. This is craft beer artistry, and we want to taste and smell it. So, without further ado, let's take a quick peek at the bottle art here. They always have very neat bottle art on their labels. It looks really cool. I can't even guess what it is, like a messed up ink blotch or something, but nonetheless, let's get this poured. I imagine this is going to be quite dark and probably quite thick. Ooh, actually, this is a nice classic brown. Now, this looks like most barley wines with which I am familiar. It's quite effervescent. They can kind of run the gamut in terms of effervescence. A lot of them are very effervescent. A lot of them are quite a bit thicker, and they tend not to be as effervescent. 9%, I should have guessed that this would be a more traditional brown, almost like a brown ale color, and a bit more effervescent. I should have guessed as much. But nonetheless, yeah, that is a beautiful looking barley wine. You'll notice it didn't really pour ahead. Barley wines don't really get ahead, and indeed you don't really want to head on a barley wine. It's really inappropriate for the style. I can tell you already, you heard me talking about how just ridiculously lush the aroma and the flavor profile and how complex. I can smell this from here. This is a pungent aroma. Oh yeah, that smells like a nice big beer, Okay, barley wines are one of the beer styles that do have typically a more pronounced boozy aroma and boozy edge and boozy quality to them. This is no different. You can smell the booze. And what you can also smell is very typical for barley wines. Very interesting mix of very deep, rich fruits. Think figs, dates, prunes, plums, apricots even. And a mix of toffee and kind of caramel, and it starts taking on these other different undertones like you might often get in specific wines, where it will impart these kind of tobacco notes. Not that it tastes of tobacco, but if you smelled it and tasted it, you would understand. This one does not in particular impart any of that tobacco quality, just for the record. It's very much the deep, rich fruits and the toffee caramel mixed with a nice boozy edge to it. And it does have this nice sweet honey-like aroma that mixes with all the fruit and the caramel. It smells really deep, it smells really rich, and it smells like it's going to be complex. I imagine it's going to be, as barley wines typically are, but let's go ahead and dive in. Oh, have mercy. Oh, that is so complex. Oh God, I should really drink more barley wine. Oh, that's so good. That is so good. Oh, okay, my initial gut reaction, before I dive in and really break it down for you, this is one of the best, if not the best, barley wines I've had to date. And I've had many, many barley wines over the years. This is expertly crafted. Okay, all of the elements that you pick up in the aroma, they hands down come through in the flavor profile. It starts with a mix of caramel, and then that fruit, that deep, rich fruit that you taste in the back mixes. And then that opens up and starts to pair with this really large boozy quality that opens up. And the flavors just keep intermingling and interplaying. And then it gets progressively more caramelly and richer and denser and thicker in its flavor profile as the finish continues, and the booze just continues to intensify. And a nice thing about barley wines, and this one's no different, even at 9%, much like a high ABV imperial stout that's been barrel aged, it imparts this beautiful warming sensation, like you're sipping on a couple fingers of scotch. That's the quality that comes through. It's you don't get that in a lot of beers, but you get it with this. And not only do I really appreciate that sensation, I really appreciate it when it pairs with a little boozy back in a beer. And I've talked about this as well. It's not a bad thing for me to have a boozy edge to a high ABV beer. And indeed, it's very apropos for the style in a barley wine. I'm going to dive back in, explore some body, explore some mouthfeel, see if I can really pinpoint everything in this finish. Okay, body-wise, it's medium. For a barley wine, it's a medium body. Medium to medium light heavy. It's not on the heavy end. It's maybe a little bit heavier than an average medium barley wine. Mouthfeel, it's quite viscous. It's very thick. It's got a nice thickness to it, and that really helps contribute to all these flavors sticking all around the palate. And the development of these flavors, I nailed it on my first sip. It really is intense caramel that opens up into these deep, rich fruit, and then it starts to pair with this booze, and then the booze and the caramel flavor commingle and intensify, and that's really where it starts to taper off at the end. It's still going. It's a very long finish. The dominant flavors I'm still getting are the kind of caramel and toffee, mixing with just a hint of booze, and at the very end the fruit come back into play. And there's also this nice little vanilla that finishes up with the caramel and the fruit, and just that last little hint of booze. It's really quite delicious. This is such a big style. It's such an interesting beer style. I really wish more people would brew more barley wines. This is so good. This is about as rich and complex as it gets in the world of beer. And if you're a fan of imperial stouts and you've never had a barley wine, I think that you would probably enjoy a barley wine. It's at least worth trying some. And you know, I can't say I've ever had a bad barley wine. I've had some that were just okay. That's okay for a barley wine. It's still big and interesting and complex, but most of them tend to be much higher end type of beers for their style than like your run-of-the-mill, okay, here's another IPA, here's another milk stout. You know, those are a dime a dozen. Barley wines, there's so much that goes into making them, and they're so much more costly to produce. If you're going to do a barley wine, you may as well go big or go home. Get it right. Take your time. Really expertly craft it, and Adroit Theory has done just that. This is a bang-on, fantastic barley wine. I cannot emphasize that enough. This right now, as of this moment, I will come out and say it, this is the best barley wine I've ever had. It's going to be an interesting dogfight here for our next beer, Smog City Bourbon Barrel-Aged O.E, which is coming up next. But for now, I'm going to take my time, slowly sip on this Adroit Theory Tenebris, and come up with my rankings, and we'll be back with the Smog City. All right, moving on to our second and final beer of today's review. This is the last review of my second Tavour shipment, Barleywines. Now this one is from Smog City Brewing Company. I have never had a beer by them. They are out of Torrance, California. This is their Bourbon Barrel-Aged O.E barley wine at 14.1%. So this is getting on the high end of barley wine and cleanly into wine ABV territory, which hence the name. I expect that all of the intricacies and all of the complexities and layers of aroma and flavor that really go in to create what is the barley wine style are going to be accentuated in this Bourbon Barrel-Aged O.E. I think they're going to take the dial and turn it up to 11. I'm really excited to jump into this one. First beer I've ever had by Smog City. Certainly Bourbon Barrel-Aged barley wine, I've never had one. I've only had standard, traditional barley wines, all of which are amazing. But Bourbon Barrel, I mean, if what a Bourbon Barrel does to the average beer is any indication of what I expect in something as so layered and rich and complex as a barley wine, honest to God, I can barely take it. So, without further ado, let's get this poured in the glass. Ah, this is another classic, kind of medium brown barley wine color. I'm giving it a little aggression. I'm going to let this one form a head and then get out of the way for me. I wanted to pour it a little more aggressively. Now, a barley wine so effervescent, this head is going to collapse very quickly. Indeed, a head on a barley wine is like a head on a sour. It's just, it shouldn't be there. It's out of place. Some will form a head, the majority do not. And, you know, it's traditionally an effervescent style. Some are quite a bit more thick and viscous than others. And, you know, that goes a long way into the development and creation of the head. But in something that's super effervescent, even if you pour very aggressively, like I poured sloppily to make it form a head intentionally, it's still going to collapse quickly just because it's so effervescent. It's just going to break up all those bubbles as it keeps rising and rising. So I'm going to go ahead and top this off just a tick to where the tulip starts to go convex again. Okay. This is another picture-perfect textbook appearance on a classic barley wine. It's kind of a medium dark brown color. You can see through them. They're a little cloudy in appearance, so it's not a cloudy beer style typically. It's just because it's that deep, rich color. It's hard to see through, so it appears cloudy as the light refracts through it. Nonetheless, it looks great. Let's give this a sniff. Interestingly enough, this barrel-aged version of Smog Cities, I cannot smell anywhere near in the ballpark the intensity of aroma as I did on the Adroit Theory. Though once you get your nose down in the glass and breathe deeply, you can really pick it up. It smells remarkably similar to the Adroit Theory. I'm getting deep, rich fruit, and I'm getting toffee, and I'm getting booze, but I'm also picking up that bourbon barrel aging, no question about it. Yeah, the bourbon back really plays nicely. It plays into the toffee and the deep, rich fruit, and it adds this vanilla element in the aroma, which is really, really pleasing. That's a very, very pleasurable aroma. It's not pronounced. You really got to get in there and breathe deeply for it to come out of the glass, but once you do, you're rewarded with this just amazing, amazing aroma. Yeah, that smells great. Folks, this head is nearly completely collapsed. It's just got a little cling on the side, so I'm okay with that on a barley wine. I'm going to jump right in and see what this one's about. Oh, oh, sweet Jesus. Oh, ho, ho. Oh, wow. Okay. I've just taken a trip here to Beer Nirvana. All right. All right, folks. Whew, have mercy. Okay. This one is actually quite a bit different than the Adroit Theory, and it's not just the bourbon barrels. What comes in on the front, you get less of a caramel sense. Well, less of a traditional caramel sense. It's more of like an Argentinian dulce de leche paired with like buttered toffee and buttered rum. That's the main kind of caramelized sugar flavor that's coming through on the profile. And then that starts mixing intensely with the bourbon barrel booze back that opens up. It doesn't give quite the same warming sensation, but it adds a lot more depth and layers to the flavor. And it adds a much more heavy and pronounced vanilla impact onto the flavor. And then that continues to spin with this really buttery toffee dulce de leche. It just richness. And then those rich, deep fruit that you got on the aroma, they make their presence known, but only on the back end. Overwhelmingly, it's buttered toffee, butter rum, dulce de leche, rich, deep, milky, condensed milk-based caramelized sugars, and that vanilla from the bourbon barrel. This is very deep. Oh my God. Oh my God. This is such a good beer. And I know my reaction is probably not even coming through quite as intensely on the camera because sometimes I just go off the rails with excitement. Let me assure you, for those of you in doubt, this is one of the most exciting beers I've had this year. Um, this is so layered and so complex and so big and so bold in flavor. It's hard to describe the experience. It's one of these beers that you just have to experience to be able to adequately put into words. This is a properly big beer. This is as big, if not bigger than the majority of the vast, really big imperial stouts and imperial porters that I review. This is a massive beer. This is a massive beer. And this is just so absolutely wonderfully put together by the brewers. I mean, bravo, Smog City. This is an all-star barley wine. If Adroit Theory was probably the best barley wine I've had to date, I mean, I don't know if I could pick a favorite out of the two because they're so distinctly different in character, but I'll tie them for first. Both of these barley wines take the cake as the best barley wines I've ever had, and I have had many, but these are unreal, next level, complex, amazing, just ludicrous amounts of character to these beers. I really wish that you could experience what I'm experiencing when I'm telling you what I'm experiencing, because mind blown. I mean, honestly, a barley wine on its own, in and of itself, is one of the most deep, rich, complex, amazing beer experiences that one can have. Once you add barrel aging into the mix, I mean, whoever thought to barrel age a barley wine, that is a sheer genius move, because this is beer gold. This is absolutely liquid beer gold. Folks, I'm really going to have to take quite a time breaking down the scores on this. This is going to be a very, very high score indeed. I mean, these two beers could be the top rated beers I've done to date. And I mean, honestly, it's a barley wine. There's a lot more beer there. A lot more beer presence. It's by its very nature, if it's done well, it's just going to blow most beers out of the water. There's just so much more to love about it. That said, I'm going to top this off. See if I can get the last. No, there's a bit more in that bottle. It's bigger than it looks. I'm going to take one more sip and explore the body and the mouthfeel and see if I can pinpoint the exact ride on the finish for you. Okay, the body is actually medium light. I know it's surprising at 14.1%, it's medium light. The mouthfeel is mildly viscous. It's not thick, it's not heavy, it doesn't have this creamy factor, it doesn't have this thick factor as it moves around in your mouth. It's a little thicker than flat, a little thicker than the viscosity of water. It's about the thickness of a very watered down smoothie would be the best way that I could think to describe it. It's less thick than a glass of chocolate milk. It's got less viscosity. However, these flavors are so pronounced and so pungent that mild viscosity it does have, it absolutely just lingers all over the palate. I'm going to give one final little, just half ounce there that's left, and a final little sip. To explore this finish. It's big caramel and buttered toffee and dulce de leche up front. Opens up into this beautiful boozy quality. Starts marrying, and then vanilla just comes through in abundance, and caramelized dark sugars. And it gets more intense and more intense. And those three flavors just combine. They Voltron. The flavors absolutely Voltron. And then starts to break away from the top of the bell curve. Now it's on its downward descent. The booze comes through a little more forward. It's a little more boozy. You can still taste this rich, deep, buttery, buttered toffee, butter rum. It's buttered caramelly booze. And now those deep, rich fruits start to make an appearance again. We're talking figs, we're talking plums, we're talking dates. Even just a hint of raisin. Not that same astringent sweetness, but that deep richness of the dried fruit. and then it just tapers off with the even balance of butter and booze and caramel and toffee and dulce de leche. And that's how it finishes out. And it's long. This is a very, very long finish. And then the booze comes back as the reigning authority on the flavor profile. As everything else dies away, it's just booze. It's still going this finish. I can still taste it. I can still taste it. Every once in a while, you get a little hint of that salted, buttery quality, but without the caramel, without the toffee, no dulce de leche, just salted butter and booze. God have mercy. This is such a good beer, folks. I hope that that description painted a picture for you of where this sensory ride is. They're both tied for best. I can't even pick a winner out of these. These are going to be two of the highest beers I've ever ranked for sure. I have no doubt about it. These are so big and complex and masterfully executed. There aren't many beers that can compete on this level. Barleywines are kind of in a league of their own. I absolutely love them, and I promise you, I will be procuring more Barleywines to give you more of an idea of what's out there. I'm going to pick some that I know aren't quite as intense and big and bold and et cetera, and I'm going to pick some in the middle, and I'm going to pick some more top tier. I'm going to let you experience the gamut. Barleywine is an underappreciated style, and I think everybody that's into big, bold, complex beers, if you've never had a barley wine, do yourself the favor. Pick one out. It's hard to go wrong even picking wine. Just pick one out. Make sure you don't drink it cold. Aim for British cellar temperature, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and pour it into appropriate glassware to let the beer do its thing. And I promise you, it's a beer experience unlike any other. Folks, I'm going to take my sweet time enjoying the bejabbers out of this one, and I'm going to come up with my scores for this, and then when we come back, we are going to get both beers rated from top to bottom, starting with the Adroit Theory Tenebris, and moving on to this Barrel-Aged Smog City Bourbon Barrel-O.E. These are both magical beers. I hope that I conveyed that properly through this camera lens. I really do. These are world-class, top-tier, best beers you'll ever have in your life kind of territory. These are beyond special. Barleywine. That's all I have to say. I'll be back with the ratings. All right, now that we have gotten to really properly enjoy, and I mean that with every fiber of my being, enjoy these two beers. Let's go through and get them ranked. Starting with the Adroit Theory Tenebris. Again, this is 9% ABV. They're out of Purcellville, Virginia. The aroma on this was just incredible. You could smell it from several feet away. It was so big and so pungent. Perfect 10, no question about it. The taste on this. I've had many barley wines over the years, but both of these were, no question about it, the best that I've ever had. The taste on this was so layered and complex and just barley wine perfection. I gave it a 10 out of 10. The body on the Tenebris was nice. 9%, it's on the lower ABV range of an average barley wine, really, which probably is the reason it didn't have quite as robust of a body as you typically expect from a barley wine, but it was still well above average. I gave it an 8. Mouthfeel on this was textbook barley wine. It had a nice bit of viscosity to it, and it is a more effervescent style. There's a lot of fermentables in there. It's gonna give a lot of food for the yeast to eat, so it's gonna make a lot of carbonation. And indeed, that was true in this case. It was textbook barley wine. I gave that a perfect 10. The finish on this was quite long. Even by barley wine standards, it, just let all of the interplay of the ingredients and the flavors that go into making just this ridiculously deep, complex style. You could really enjoy them for a long haul. It didn't last quite as long as some of the best in terms of the finish barley wines that I've had, but it was very, very close. I gave it a 9. Head and retention on this was textbook barley wine. It's very effervescent. It's very thick. It doesn't normally form a head, and indeed, much like with most sours, it's not really appropriate for the style, so it got out of the way. I gave that a perfect 10. It did what it's supposed to do. Appearance-wise, this was textbook barley wine. Barley wines can kind of run the gamut, but this is the prototypical appearance of a barley wine. It's a deep brown, like a brown ale, and you know, that's how it looks. Perfect 10 out of 10 for the appearance. The balance on this was so well balanced. I mean, honestly, every bit of this beer was just top tier, and the balance was no exception. All of the ingredients that went in to make the interplay of all of the flavors, you could just keep picking them out and enjoying the ride as they kept intermingling, and nothing overshadowed or overpowered anything else. It was just, it was barley wine perfection. I gave it a 10 out of 10. Feeling an intangible, as you probably already guessed, I absolutely loved it. I did give it subjectively a perfect 10. Example of this style. Again, I've had many, many barley wines over the years, and I always enjoyed them, but both of these that I had today were hands down the best I've ever had in my life. If you're looking to an example of what a barley wine can and should be, leave no stone unturned to try to get your hands on these. That's a perfect 10 out of 10, bringing the total score on Adroit Theory's Tenebris to a 97 out of 100. Now, I could be mistaken, but I think this is easily in top 3 to 5 beers I've reviewed. I don't recall if I had any ever rank higher than a 97. I might have had a couple, 2 or 3, that have tied it, so this could be tied for first or second. It's got to be. Moving on to the Smog City. This was the bigger, bolder of the two, and it had that bourbon barrel aging, which I've never had a bourbon barrel aged or any kind of barrel aged barley wine. It was really, really nice. That's a really good idea on this beer style. It's already so rich and complex and layered with flavor. Why not just throw an extra element of complexity into it? And, you know, it's an interesting move, and I think it's one that absolutely paid off for Smog City. This was 14.1% ABV on the Bourbon Barrel-Aged O.E, and they are out of Torrance, California. Starting with aroma. This was the only category on this beer, and indeed out of either of these beers, that left me underwhelmed. You really had to get into the glass, get in there deep, and really breathe in deeply to get the aroma at all, which is kind of uncommon for a barley wine anyway, because they're so big and bold, but I was particularly thrown off by it because of the bourbon barrel aging. I just expected big, massive ABV bourbon barrel back on top of it to just be super pungent, much like the Adroit Theory, but it wasn't. I gave it just average. I gave it a 5 out of 10. Taste-wise, this was equally enjoyable. I mean, I can't pick which I think is a better barley wine. They're both distinctly different, but there's no question in my mind, these are the best 2 barley wines I've ever had. I'm kind of, for me personally, it's a 2-way tie for the best barley wine I've ever had. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. The body on this. This did have more fermentables in it, higher ABV by 5.1%, and that indeed went into making a much more robust, heavier barley wine body. It still wasn't quite as heavy as the very top tier heaviest, and kind of as you would expect from a much higher ABV barley wine, but exceptional. I give it a 9 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, this was just like the Tenebris. For the exact same reasons, I gave it a perfect 10 out of 10. The finish on this one. The finish on this one was very, very long, just like the Tenebris, and the interplay of flavors was basically the same. It was just that constant intermingling and picking out. Nothing really overshadowed any of the others. And I only docked 1 point on this one for the same reason I docked 1 point on Tenebris, because I have had many, many barley wines where not just the interplay of flavors, but just that beautiful long finish, long extension. These were both very long, but not as long as some of the other barley wines that I've had. So I did dock 1 point, obviously, on both of these. That's a 9 for the finish on the Smog City. Head and retention. This did form a head, as you saw when I poured, and it very quickly got out of the way. Again, classic barley wine, very effervescent style. In general, it's not always, but in general it is. This was no exception. Had my sloppy pour, aside, it got out of the way, and it was perfect barley wine, 10 out of 10. Appearance on this, you could really not distinguish the two apart. They were textbook barley wine, perfect 10 out of 10. Balance on this was equally as well balanced as this was. I mean, just these two beers are an absolute masterclass in what to do and how to do a barley wine correctly. I mean, just absolute top of their game barley wines. I could not think of two barley wines that I would recommend over these two. I just can't. And I've had plenty. These are hands down the best. Beautiful balance. Perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling and intangible. I expect you already know the answer, and you're right. It's a perfect 10 out of 10. I absolutely love both of them. They were phenomenal beers. Finally, as an example of the style, yet again, I had to give it a perfect 10 out of 10. These were both distinctly different and both insanely enjoyable and completely unique in their own right. But at their heart, they were true to the barley wine style, just as rich and big and complex as could be, and just myriad of flavors, just dancing all around your mouth. The whole beer experience was just beer nirvana. It absolutely was. It doesn't get better than this, folks. A proper top tier barley wine, there aren't many beers that can even come close to competing with these. These are the granddaddy of beer styles. They're the biggest, boldest, most complex, most rich, most layered, you know, even put most imperial stouts to shame, and I'm a die-hard imperial stout fan. That brings the total score on the Smog City Bourbon Barrel-Aged O.E. to a 93 out of 100. So only a 4-point spread, and really, it was just the aroma on this one that caused that massive 4-point spread, but these are top tier. I mean, if you're a barley wine fan, grab either of these. You're not going to be disappointed. If you've never tried a barley wine and you like big, bold beers, these would be, I mean, you would be spoiled after drinking these, but I can't, you know, not recommend them. They are that good. These are two of the best beers I've ever had in my life. Out of the many thousands of different beers I've had in my life, these are two of the absolute best. Folks, that's the barley wine review. It was a treat to myself to save it for last, and I hope that I did it justice through the camera lens. These are two absolute top tier beers. You cannot go wrong with either of them. I highly recommend barley wines. I think it's an underappreciated style, and just you get so much out of it when it's done well, and these were just world-class barley wines. As always, I do thank you for tuning in. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. I definitely want you to comment. I want to know what you think. I want to hear your feedback. I want to hear your suggestions, ideas you have. I want to engage and you know, make this a place where not only I can do what I want to do and things that I think will be of value to my viewers, but also if there's something you would like to know or you would like to see, please let me know. I absolutely will be taking suggestions to heart. If you would like to know when our videos go live, just click the notification bell. You'll get notified as soon as they go live on YouTube. And again, thank you very much. Until next time, folks, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.